What is going on, everybody? How is everybody doing today? I did not want to be talking about the Knicks offseason. Today, obviously, the Knicks ended up losing Game 7 at home of the second round in the Eastern Conference, 130-109 yesterday against the Indiana Pacers. So, yeah, today we're going to be talking about the Knicks, how they lost, Pacers advance, Knicks offseason plans. We'll talk about the Thunder offseason plans as well. We'll talk about the Nuggets offseason plans also, and then we'll also hand out our conference finals predictions. So we actually had really a great round of games over the weekend. I mean, like Mavericks Thunder Game 6 was really good. Obviously, the Game 7 between the Nuggets and the Timberwolves was fantastic. And then the Knicks-Pacers game was not really great. Well, I mean, it was fine for the first, 3.5 quarters. It was still somewhat close. And then once the Brunson injury, they ended up losing. So that's going to be on the agenda for today. Let's get into this. All right, so let's talk about the Knicks-Pacers game here. So this game, obviously, I didn't feel good about it going into it. I mean, there was the report that Josh Hart could be out. OG Anunoby could be back. Josh Hart ended up playing through an abdominal injury in this game that he suffered in Game 6. And then OG Anunoby only ended up playing 5 games. He just obviously couldn't really go out there. He tried his best. He actually hit 2 pretty big shots to start off the game, and then he was taken out after 5 minutes, never came back in. So we could say a lot about this series. I mean, we could touch on the Knicks side of things. This is a disappointing ending to the season. They were the 2 seed on paper. They were the favorites against Indiana in round 2, and they took a Game 2 victory, winning both at the Garden, but OG Anunoby went down with an injury, and the Knicks were already missing probably their best shot creator off the bench in Bojan Bogdanovic, an elite rebounder in Mitchell Robinson, and they obviously are without their All-NBA forward, Julius Randle. So that was obviously something that we knew pretty much going into this series. All those guys were out, but OG suffering the hamstring injury in Game 2 really, I guess, limited this team overall. Obviously, Game 3 was the one that the Knicks could have stole in Indiana. It was 111-106 final. That was the Andrew Nembhard game-winning 3. The step back that still can't believe he hit it. What a big time shot from him. Then the Knicks get blown out on Mother's Day. And then, honestly, I thought they were going to just lose Game 5 and Game 6 and then just lose 4 in a row being without OG Anunoby. They shocked me when they won by 30 points at home, 91-121 on May 14th. And then you're like, here we go. There's a chance. I mean, can they steal Game 6 in Indy again, and just kind of replicate Game 3? Because I didn't think we were ever going to get a Game 5 performance again like that from New York. And then they ended up losing Game 6. And I had a feeling Game 7 really wasn't going to go their way either. I mean, with these current rosters and health included, Pacers are better, man, right? If you have little to no OG Anunoby, the Knicks are relying way too much on Alec Burks, who, to his credit, stepped up offensively for sure. But Miles McBride really wasn't hitting his shots. Jalen Brunson did not play great in Game 6 or Game 7. And you basically had the model that if Jalen Brunson was not scoring 30 plus points efficiently, the Knicks were not winning this series. Brunson played pretty poorly. He was a -9 in 29 minutes. He shot 6 for 17 from the field, and he ended up fracturing his hand he tried swiping the ball when Haliburton was going up for a layup, and then it kind of just bent back on his knee. And once that was out, I mean, the Knicks, I think, cut it to 12 at one point in the 4th. But yeah, it's really tough though. Honestly, I was very proud on how the Knicks played throughout the first 3 quarters when they were just as depleted as they were. Hartenstein was also dealing with a back injury. It looks like DiVincenzo was banged up as well, and the Pacers couldn't freaking miss, man. They ended up shooting 67% from the field. They were shooting 80% from the field at the end of the second quarter. This team had one of the greatest, if not the greatest, efficiency games in a Game 7, in a playoff game, and just an overall NBA game ever. And it happened in one of the biggest games of this franchise's history in a decade. So they were hot at the right time. Nothing you can do. They shot 54% from 3, 13 for 24. Haliburton wasn't missing. Miles Turner wasn't missing. It felt like Aaron Nesmith. I mean, he didn't miss a single shot this whole game from the line, from 3, or overall from the field. They got good, obviously great bench play out of TJ McConnell. He was a +21. He wasn't missing any shots either. It just, you go down the line, Siakam and Haliburton were the most inefficient guys, and they both shot above 50% from the field. It was kind of insane, their offensive output there, and it just felt like every Haliburton step back, every Siakam fadeaway, every Miles Turner floater was going in no matter what, and there's nothing you can do. And you got to give props to the Pacers doing that on the road on a Game 7 in probably the most hostile arena, or just lively arena in Madison Square Garden. So the Pacers are going to be taking on the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. They entered into somewhat of a rebuild a few years ago, and I mean, they ended up with like Benedict Mather and a top pick in the 22 draft. Last year in the 23 draft, the Indiana Pacers ended up with a top 10 pick, Jarris Walker, and a year later, they're in the conference finals. Now, they acquired Siakam along the way, acquired Halliburton. When they traded away Sabonis, it was kind of like a mini rebuild because that team could only go so far with like Oladipo and his injury history, and then they had LeVert and they moved him, and that pick ended up being Andrew Nembhard. And you got to give props to the Pacers front office and Rick Carlisle for not backing down and turning this team around in such a short amount of time. I've been a big criticizer of Carlisle, and I feel like he's been an overrated head coach since the 2011 Mavericks playoff run. And you know what? You can say what you want, like the Knicks were injured, the Bucks were injured, and yeah, when these two teams are fully healthy, they're better on paper than the Indiana Pacers, but the Pacers beat who they were going up against, and that's what you're supposed to do in the playoffs. So maybe they get swept or they lose in 5 to Boston, and it's just like, all right, yeah, they probably got here because of injuries. And I think going into next year, I don't think they're going to be ranked as a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference, and I don't think that's any disrespect to the Indiana Pacers because this is a conference finals team, and this is a team that is healthy enough, young enough, and deep enough where they can run up and down the floor and take all the shots they can in a 48-minute game. And this team is going to hopefully bring back everybody next year as well for the Pacers. And I think like on paper next year, you're going to say that the Bucks are better. You would think the Celtics, obviously. You would assume maybe the Knicks and Philadelphia on paper, but I think the Pacers are right there in the Eastern Conference. And hey, they may push Boston to 6 games or maybe 7. You never know. I mean, this is definitely the toughest test and the healthiest team that Boston's going up against because Boston played Miami without Jimmy Butler. They played Cleveland with a banged up Jared Allen and Donovan Mitchell. So there's a really good chance that Indiana is going to push Boston to 6 games. Maybe even 7. So we'll see what happens there. I'll give my prediction at the end of the pod. But yeah, for the Knicks, they enter into a pretty eventful offseason, but also an offseason where you expect them to kind of run a lot of things back. I did tweet out my ideal Knicks offseason. So they have 2 free agents. They have 2 big free agents in OG Anunoby and Isaiah Hartenstein. Now, Anunoby's an interesting one. I'm not worried about him going anywhere. Obviously, the Knicks gave up a decent amount to get him, and RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley and the 31st pick in this draft. But OG Anunoby is his agent is Nick Rose, I believe is his first name, who is the son of the Knicks general manager, Leon Rose. So I have like 99% certainty he will be back on the Knicks. Now, I'm a little afraid how much he's going to get. He's going to opt out of his $19.9 million player option. You would think Anunoby at 27 years old is going to get, or excuse me, 26. He's going to be 27 soon. Is going to get a 4-year deal. I'm hoping it's around $120 million, but it's probably going to be more than that. He may get, so that's $30 million a year. There's a chance he gets close to $40 million a year because he is an elite tier of a defensive wings. And if you're in a conference going up against guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo and Jason Tatum, and even at times Halliburton and Siakam, and obviously some other guys in the East that you could throw OG on, this is the guy to have, and he's going to come at a premier price, and he's going to get paid from the Knicks. Now, I also hope there's maybe some injury contract things in here because OG has been relatively hurt throughout his career, and obviously hamstring injuries are pretty fluky, and he was healthy. Well, he missed time with the Knicks as well in the regular season. He had the elbow injury, and he missed about a month of basketball, a little bit more than that, but OG has not played more than 70 games since his rookie year. He did play 67 games in 2023. He played, what did he play this year? 50 games total in the regular season. And he, even like in the Raptors 2019 championship run, he played 67 games in the regular season, but then missed that whole playoff run, if you remember, from appendicitis. So like OG's had his fair share of injuries in his career, which is a little alarming, but he's somebody that can win a Defensive Player of the Year award next year for sure. So I assume he's going to be back now. Isaiah Hartenstein is a free agent. They need to bring him back the Knicks because speaking of injuries, Mitchell Robinson, who's on a good contract and is making $14 million next year and is an elite offensive and defensive rebounder, he has had his injury concerns as well. Mitchell Robinson is constantly hurt every year, and if the Knicks plan on playing deep into April and in May and then hopefully June at one point, they need their starting centers to be healthy. And Hartenstein played through injuries. He didn't play great in Game 7 because he was definitely dealing with some back stuff, but He was out there at least. Mitchell Robinson, he did play 72 games in 2022. Knicks obviously didn't make the playoffs that year, but then 59 games last year, 31 games this year, was out most of the season, and obviously played injured in round one against the Sixers. And it was assumed it was fluky stuff with Embiid falling on his leg once, and you hope that doesn't happen again. But every time Mitch goes up for a rebound, every time he jumps in the air, I get a little squeamish. I'm like, all right, is he going to land awkwardly? It's a lot of ankle stuff, a lot of foot stuff with him. So the Knicks need to figure out what their center spot is going to look like next year, because Precious Achiuwa is a free agent, and Isaiah Hartenstein. I don't think Achiuwa is more than a third center on your team, and that's kind of what he was for the Knicks, but I had to play more with Mitchell Robinson out. Isaiah Hartenstein, though, is going to go for a pretty penny on the open market. Hartenstein does not, or the Knicks do not own the full bird rights on Isaiah Hartenstein due to the 2-year deal they signed him on, so they can only offer him, I believe it's 4 years, $73 million, which means a team could throw the Brinks truck at him. So they can give him $18.5 million a year, which is still good, and that may be enough for Isaiah Hartenstein to return on the Knicks. They could sign him to a 1+1. He can opt out of the year 2 of that deal and get $25 million in a year from now. But I think Hartenstein, he's made some good money in the NBA, like to us. He's made $13 million in this league, actually around $20 million now, or $22 million after this year. But he's going to want $70 million plus guaranteed to set himself up for the future. So there's a chance. I mean, teams with cap space this offseason could go after him. OKC, we'll get to them. They could use some rebounding, and that could be Isaiah Hartenstein. I don't know if Detroit or Charlotte wants to throw some cap space at him, or Washington. They have a big hole at the center position. Or maybe San Antonio thinks Hartenstein could play great with Wemby. I don't know. But if a team throws 4 years, $100 million at Hartenstein and gives him $7 million more a year, he's probably going to be inclined to take that, especially if it's a team like San Antonio where there's no income tax, right? Or maybe he ends up, I don't know, somewhere else. But it's going to be a little like nerve-wracking for the Knicks to have consistent center play next year. So that's a big thing. They have 2 first-round picks in this draft, 24 and 25. If the Knicks ended up keeping both of those, which I doubt it. They've moved a lot of their picks in most recent drafts. I doubt they had 2 rookies. I would really like to see them draft Tyler Kolek if he's on the board with one of those. This team could use a TJ McConnell. Like, McConnell would be perfect on this team in the non-Brunson minutes to have a facilitator out there and a lead ball handler. As much as I love Deuce McBride, it is way too much to ask him to be that guy. And I don't know if he's ever going to be that guy more than like a spot-up shooter offensively throughout the remaining 3 years of his contract. So Tyler Kolek, one of the best passers in this draft, and one of the best, I think, point guards like ready for next year in this draft. Like, there's a chance he's the best facilitator in this class. He's better than Topic and Reed Shepherd passing the ball, or Isaiah Collier. I wouldn't be shocked on that. I mean, he averaged 8.5 assists last year, or excuse me, he averaged 7.5 assists last year for Marquette, and he's someone that's NBA ready, solid shot, good handle. Like, I would love to see him go to the Knicks. And if the Knicks keep the other first, I mean, they could look at the Day'Ron Holmes of the world. They could look at the Ulrich Chomsky's. I mean, if Zach Edey's on the board, like, they could look for some size. Because I said, like, they have multiple free agents at the center position, and they may lose Hartenstein or Achiuwa next year. But if not, I would like to go maybe a higher upside wing. I mean, I think Johnny Furphy or Keyshawn George, and even letting them play for the Westchester Knicks and having some more facilitation and kind of can get their feel for the game down, and they could be a call-up in a pinch if there's injuries for the Knicks, or they could just spend some time developing, kind of like Quentin Grimes did and Miles McBride, and they could be really good, useful guys on the back end of those rookie contracts. They could go for also more NBA-ready wings. If Tristan De Silva's there, they could look at Kevin McCullough out of Kansas. They could look at Dylan Jones out of Weber State, or Jalen Tyson out of California. Those are guys that could also help them next year as well. So I think there's a couple routes that the Knicks can go. I'd really like to see them add Tyler Kolek in this draft. If not, maybe Bub Carrington from Pittsburgh if he makes it that far. But if not, maybe go wings. I mean, I also wouldn't mind the Knicks moving 24 and 25 to move up into the top 20 if Devin Carter is available, because I think Devin Carter fits this team perfectly as well. So those are kind of things what I would like to see the Knicks do on draft night. I mean, Tibbs and Leon Rose, I believe, are free agents or expiring deals, the GM and the head coach. So I would like to bring those back. I mean, you can say what you want about Tibbs, but it's the best head coach the Knicks have had in quite some time. So I would like for them to bring him back. And then the Bojan Bogdanovic piece, he's making around $18 million next year. It's an expiring contract. I would look to move him. They have a top 4 Bucks protected pick next year, top 13 Pistons, top 10 Wizards picks for a secondary shot creator. We haven't seen Randall play well in the playoffs, and this team desperately needs somebody to take the load off Brunson because it gets very repetitive late in games. It's Brunson high screen and roll. It just basically it's a Brunson pick and roll with the big man, and he's trying to get a mid-ranger. You hope he gets doubled and there's somebody that can hit a spot up 3 like a DiVincenzo or a Hart at times. or he gets to the foul line, right? So like it's like very repetitive and it can only take you so far. So though you hope that's maybe Julius Randle, but Randle is 0 for 3 in playing well in playoff series for the Knicks. He was terrible against the Hawks in 21. He was not good against the Cavs in 23 and was even worse against the Heat in 23 as well. So if that ends up being a DeMar DeRozan, you know what? I don't hate that. I know DeRozan isn't the greatest three-point shooter, but I think like if you can get him for Bojan Bogdanovic in a 2-year deal and it's a sign and trade, I would do that. I would. Obviously, Mikal Bridges would be a pipe dream because you could still think he could be a secondary shot creator and he's an elite defender. But one, would Brooklyn even move him since they don't own their first round picks and they turned down that trade with the Rockets because they value the Suns picks over theirs? And why would they move him to the crosstown rival, the Knicks, right? I feel like the only way the Knicks can somehow finesse Mikal Bridges from the Nets is going to be a 3-team trade. Like, Mikal Bridges isn't some Darius Garland or Trae Young deal and he gets sent to the Knicks or Brandon Ingram or something like that, right? So maybe the Knicks are able to get Brandon Ingram this offseason. Like, could 24, 25 Bojan and like 1 or 2 of those like Bucks or Pistons or Wizards first round picks next year land you Brandon Ingram? Maybe. Do you trust Brandon Ingram in a secondary shot creator role? Do you think you can get him to an extension? Do you think he could play well next to OG Anunoby and Julius Randle or something like that? I mean, maybe he fits the timeline. He's 26 years old, but he's an expiring deal. I don't know. So that's the questions the Knicks are going to have to face this offseason, and you pray that they're healthy for the 2025 year, because this is the second straight year of a second round exit. If the Knicks lose in round 2 next year, you're going to be disappointed because now you're staying kind of in the same tier and you would hope to be elevated. That was supposed to be this year, man. Like, they were supposed to be in the conference finals, it seemed like, but then injuries kind of derailed that. So there's nothing you can do. A lot of those injuries were fluky. Some of it have to be on the minutes. But hey, when guys went down like Bojan Bogdanovic and Randle, Josh Hart was forced to play 48 minutes a night because you really couldn't play Shake Milton out there or trust Alec Burks against the Sixers in that series. And there was really nothing they could do when OG went down and they had to play Alec Burks. So having those guys like Burks go back on a vet minimum, like I would love that, just to have him as like your 11th man. And that's what the Knicks had this year. But when Randle goes down and Anunoby goes down, Bojan goes down, Mitch goes down, you're really digging into the 11 to 14 guys on the bench, and you're not trusting Shake Milton or Jacob Toppin or Charles Brown or one of those guys, right, in a playoff series. So you hope that, I'm just hoping the Knicks are able to re-sign their guys, keep that trade piece open with Bojan. Maybe it's a Bruce Brown. Maybe it's somebody like that, just another good role player, but they desperately, I think, need another guy to take some of the load off Brunson. And I would sign Brunson to an extension this offseason. He may wait a year because he can get a little bit more money. I would not sign Randle to an extension until I see him show up in the playoffs. So yeah, talked a lot about the Knicks there and what I think they should do this offseason. I'm optimistic still, and I'm looking forward to this offseason. I don't think they change up this team too much. Expect the Nova Knicks to be back. I expect Anunoby to be re-signed. You still have Miles McBride into the fold. Mitch is going to come back, hopefully fully healthy. We'll see. But this team does have 2 first-round picks, which I'm excited for. They do have potentially 4 first-round picks next year. I mean, you'd need the Pistons to be not in the top 13. So you need them to be like an 8 seed in the play-in tournament, or the Wizards to be outside the top 10. And the Bucks pick is top 4 protected, but they have their first. I mean, the Knicks realistically are going to have 2 first-round picks next year again. So this team is still set up to exceed, and I'm excited to see what they do this offseason. It was a bittersweet ending to just such a magical season as a Knicks fan, and I know I'm talking a lot about the Knicks, but truly as a Knicks fan that's been through some dark, dark days as a fan. Like, I became a Knicks fan, it was 06. Was my first year watching the Knicks. My first game was when, you know what, actually, I can actually look up the date of my first game because it was Nate Robinson's game winner against the Sixers, which is a crazy first game to go to, and that's maybe why I fell in love with this team. This was 2006. So 06, this was, wow, no, wait, this might be, was this November of 05 was my first Knicks game? Was this actually my first Knicks game? Actually, hold on. Let me pull this up because no way. Was it in overtime? Nate Robinson. Yeah. Okay. Wow. November of 05 was my first ever Knicks game. So that's kind of like when I've been a fan of the 06 season. And I watched that team go 23-59, and I still fell in love with it, man. I watched them sign Isaiah Thomas, be even worse the next 2 years. D'Antoni was not great either. And they fired him, went to Mike Woodson. I mean, their best season was the 2013 season where they went to round 2 against the Pacers, lost in 6 games, and then regressed by 17 wins the year after. 17-65 with Derek Fisher. Terrible Kirk Rambis like takeover. Hornacek was bad. Fizdale was somehow even worse than all those coaches that preceded him. And then Mike Miller was fine, and then Tibbs came into the fold and turned this team around. And the Knicks have had, I mean, 2022 wasn't great, but 4 solid seasons in a vacuum compared to what the last 20 years has been. And this was their best season since basically the 2000 season. And yeah, so it's like kind of it's been a rocky road for the Knicks, and hopefully they just build up some consistency and they don't do anything too stupid this offseason. But I believe in this new regime, and I think the Knicks will be back as conference finals contenders in 2025. All right, now we can talk about the OKC Thunder and the Dallas Mavericks, and like kind of what the Thunder could do this offseason, because we'll talk more about the Mavericks as a whole in my conference finals preview. But yeah, the OKC Thunder lost 117-116 against the Mavericks. They had, I think, overall a weird playoff series against Dallas. I mean, I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander really showed why he could be a top 5 player in this league. And I think you look back on even like that Paul George trade, and like I was 19 years old when it happened, so I remember like what we all viewed Shai as maybe this guard that can, you know, maybe be a 20-point per game scorer one day, but someone that's going to be an elite defender, and someone that can maybe be more of an off-ball guy at the 2 rather than like kind of a lead initiator. And this version of Shai, I don't think many people expected. I know the Thunder didn't expect that when they traded for Shai. You would think they would just hope he was going to be like half of this, and the Clippers definitely didn't expect he was going to be better than Paul George in a few seasons after trading him away for PG. And Shai stepped up in the playoffs, man. He was 30 points consistently every night. You do wonder if he has another level to his game, like if J-Dub at times wasn't playing well, or Chet obviously wasn't playing well, could Shai put up 40 or even 50? Because he's very efficient, man. This dude is not going to shoot you out of games whatsoever, but I feel like he's kind of capped in that 30 range, like as someone that needs to be aggressive and maybe needs to be a little selfish with the ball, right? Or just demand it on offense in the half quarter. Maybe that's what Shai realizes into his age 26 season. But it's crazy because he's 25 years old. Like, Shai is so young. And I know people are going to be like, the Thunder boost somewhat of an opportunity this season, because they went 57-25. They were the 1 seed in the Western Conference. They were a top 5 defensive team, a top 5 offensive team. They had all these guys playing so well on cheap deals, like Cason Wallace and Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins. And then obviously Chet and J-Dub on rookie deals. But they fell short, second round. It's got to be disappointing as a 1 seed, a team that won game 1 as well in this series, and then ended up losing in 6. So for OKC, they will have an interesting offseason upon them. I mean, like, they're a team that is going to be just fine next year. They probably will be the favorites to be the 1 seed again in the regular season, and you have everybody coming back, right? Pretty much everybody is kind of coming back. Gordon Hayward's going to be gone. He's the one free agent, but they have the 12th overall pick in this draft, and there's guys at number 12 they can look to replace what Gordon Hayward was for them, and it wasn't a good player whatsoever. Gordon Hayward was very disappointing in his tenure in 26 regular season games for the Thunder. I mean, he shot the ball fine, but 5 points, and he was obviously not really a factor too much in the playoffs either. You got more out of Cason Wallace, who you expect to develop next year on both ends of the floor. Isaiah Joe is still going to be an elite 3-point shooter, and Aaron Wiggins just overall as a rotational piece has been fantastic, on both ends of the floor. So OKC has most of their rotation coming back next year. Lou Dort is still under contract on a very nice deal. Chet still has another year before you have to pay him. Same with J-Dub, but this is the offseason where they maybe need to add somebody on a 3-year deal that could be very good for them. They can have cap space this offseason. So I think Josh Giddey is definitely going to be thrown around in trade talks. He was not great for them in the playoffs whatsoever. He didn't start game 6 and played 11 minutes and just wasn't really a factor on both ends of the floor throughout this series. And you don't trust his jumper and you don't trust his defense. And he had a very weird year. First 75% of the season was really bad. And you're like, what happened to Josh Giddey? Is it all the offseason stuff, the off-the-court stuff? And then for like a 20-game stretch in the regular season, he was phenomenal. He looked like the Giddey of the 2022 season or the 2023 season, and in the playoffs, non-existent. So it's definitely going to hurt his trade value. They'd be definitely selling him at the lowest point, but I do think it would be time to move on from him if you don't even think he's going to be a good rotational piece in a specific role in the playoffs. So you have Ousmane Dieng maybe hopefully developing into more of a role next year as well. I think plenty of teams would be interested in Josh Giddey that are looking for a guard. I think like the Wizards would be interested, the Jazz would be interested, the Nets would be interested, the Pelicans may be even interested, right? Like a team that is looking for this lead initiator to even start. I think a lot of teams would start Josh Giddey. OKC is one of the few teams where they're just a very talented young team overall that Giddey, they didn't have to start him because you have Cason Wallace, who's kind of an elite defender and is already super efficient, or Isaiah Joe, who can come in and hit some threes. So I think you look to move Giddey this offseason if you're OKC. You want to, I think, add some rebounding as well, like Chet Holmgren. They didn't add size at the deadline. We called them out for it, and I think a lot of Thunder's fans got a little uptight about that, and they're like, you know what, this is what we're building here. Well, like, we would have added one if we could have, or if we wanted to, because they have the assets and the young guys to go out and get Another big man. So I think they're going to look, I think they're going to realize, yep, we need to like check that out and rebounded. They're going to look for some size in this offseason. It could be via trade. It could be a Josh Giddey guy. Is Utah done with Walker Kessler, right? And they have a top 10 pick. Maybe you do some Kessler for Giddey swap or something like that, right? I think they look for a big man. I don't think they look into like an offensive-minded guy like a Valanciunas in free agency, but hey, they can offer a sign and trade for Nick Claxton or just flat out sign Claxton or the guy we just talked about, Isaiah Hartenstein. They can give him a decent amount of money. Now, you're going to eventually have to pay Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams, two guys you definitely want to pay, because I even tweeted out, I mean, it was a little bit more of like in the moment, and I was like, let me actually just pull up the tweet. Jalen Williams is like an elite secondary guy at 23. He kind of is. Like, Jalen Williams was fantastic this year as a number 2 option. Let's think about how many teams, like we'll say like top 10 is elite secondary options out of every team in the league. I actually could prove myself wrong here. How many teams have a better number 2 than him? Boston, yes. Jaylen Brown. Brooklyn, no. New York, I mean, I don't think he's much different than Julius Randle, like when it comes down to like a game 7 or whatever. But we could say the Knicks, the Sixers definitely with Maxey, Denver with Murray, that's 4. I don't think Cat, I know like playoffs are different, but Cat is also a couple years older. I think J-Dub is just as good as Karl-Anthony Towns when you need him to be. Not Portland, not Utah, not Golden State. I don't think Paul George is that much better than Jalen Williams. Obviously the Lakers, so that's like 5. Devin Booker, 6. Fox or Sabonis is 7. Dame is 8. Halliburton or Siakam or J-Dub, I don't think it's that much different for Siakam, but I would give it to Siakam. Cleveland, no. Chicago, no. Atlanta, no. Charlotte, no. Miami, I don't think so. Like, Bam's a better player overall, but a secondary shot creator, no. Orlando, no. Washington, no. Dallas, yes, so that's 10. Maybe Memphis, maybe New Orleans, but I don't know. So I think he's like a borderline top 10 number 2 option in this league. And Chet, an elite big man at 22. What we saw from Chet at 22 years old was elite big man play. Just like off this whole seasons in a row, pure like centers and his specific role, how many were better, right? Maybe Kristaps Porzingis. I think he's better than what the Knicks have, or Claxton. Embiid obviously is better. Raptors, no. Jokic, yes. Whatever, Minnesota's 5. I guess Gobert, yes. So that's 4. Portland, no. Utah, no. Golden State, no. Clippers, no. Lakers, yes, with AD. Suns, no. Kings, yes, with Sabonis, so that's 6. Bulls, no. Cavs, I mean, Chet, I think, is very equivalent to Jared Allen. Pistons, no. Pacers, I mean, Chet, I think, is not far off from Miles Turner, but he's also like 6 years younger. We can go through this, obviously, but I think, I mean, I could have said like an elite for being 22 and being 23, but these guys are going to get big deals, and they stepped up, I think, throughout the regular season, and they're only going to get better this offseason as well. They have the coach of the year. They're going to be just fine. And I know, like in 2010, we could have said that, or 2012 when they lost to the Heat in the finals, and they never came back with the KD, Harden, and Russ teams, but I think this team is in somewhat a better position. Like, Shea's peak probably won't be KD. J-Dub's peak maybe not be Russ's peak, but I think as a cohesive unit with Dort and Holmgren and the rotational guys that they could pay and all the picks and a great young coach who I think is better than what Scott Brooks was at the time, this team is going to be just fine. And I think the Thunder could be a finals champion next year for sure. So yeah, this offseason, I would look to add some rebounding. I would trade Josh Giddey and then run most of this team back. And I think maybe if you can draft somebody a little bit older at 12, like a Dalton Connect, yeah, maybe Dalton Connect is your best option. Maybe a Devin Carter, maybe a Tristan Da Silva. I mean, I could be intrigued about just drafting and hopefully developing Cody Williams, and then you just put him on like that Ousmane Dieng path as well. But you obviously didn't work out with Pokusevski, but they just have options this offseason. So I think the Thunder are going to be just fine. And lastly, for the Denver Nuggets, yeah, kind of crazy that they ended up blowing a 20-point lead in this game, man. They held Minnesota to 38 points at half, and then they ended up almost doubling that and scoring 60. So kind of almost doubling, but not really, in the second half, and they won 98-90. Crazy, man. I mean, the starting 5 for Minnesota fully healthy really did step up in a game where Anthony Edwards shot 6 for 24. Horrible shooting game for Anthony Edwards. They ended up being just fine, and McDaniel stepped up defensively. Cat stepped up offensively, and this team, like, its defense showed up. Jokic at 34 and 19 and 7. Murray at 35, but the way they shut down Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. and KCP really just kept them alive in this game, and it was just absolutely electric. And once you kind of looked at the jersey matchup here, like the throwback Wolves jerseys going up against the area code or whatever zip code of Denver, or the altitude, whatever that 4-digit number is, or whatever the digit, you know what I'm talking about. Those jerseys are horrible. Horrible. And for the Timberwolves, they're elite. So maybe they deserve to win this. They win game 7 after being down 3-2, after being up 2-0. And they kind of shocked a lot of people and won this game. I mean, Denver going into this game was about 5-point favorites. So I think the Knicks were also favorites going into this game, right? Knicks were 2.5-point favorites. So yeah, both underdogs won on the road, which is pretty cool. For Denver this offseason, I mean, it's a weird position for them because you're going to run most of this team back. You're going to look, I think they have to, let me just pull it up. They're going to look to extend Aaron Gordon, I think is the free agent that's soon. No, Jamal Murray is a free agent next year in 2025. So is Aaron Gordon. He's got a player option he would opt out of. So you're going to hope to extend both those guys, which you will, because you think you have your core 4 of Jokic, Murray, Porter Jr., and Gordon, and you hope all the playoff revenue, I know they have cheap owners, I think they're cheap, would look to just extend them no matter the luxury tax. I mean, Zeke Naji, $8 million doesn't look great, but you hope he could still develop a new good backup big man. Christian Brown, Julian, is really good for what his role is, and Peyton Watson and Strother, you could think could take steps next year. They do have their first round pick, at 28 this year, so they're going to look to maybe add somebody that's NBA ready. Maybe it's a Deron Holmes, or maybe they look for a guard, because there'll be plenty of those, like a KJ Simpson, AJ Mitchell, these guys that can play point guard. I don't think it's gonna be like a Cam Spencer, but with Reggie Jackson being a free agent, I mean, I'm sure they'd love Tyler Kolek as well. But yeah, they got to figure out what they're doing with KCP. KCP can opt out of his $15 million player option. He could look to try to get one last semi-big deal, $50, $60, $70 million guaranteed on the open market, that I think a team would definitely use their mid-level exception at least on him. Like what DiVincenzo got last year, I think it was 4 for $60. I think that's what he can definitely get on the open market, if not a little bit more, because he was an all-defensive caliber guy this year, and he's still an elite spot-up shooter for you. So you hope you're running this team back, and you're praying that Brown, Strother, Peyton Watson, or Zeke Naji could take a step for you as a rotational piece. You hope your 28th overall pick can maybe contribute right away more than what Strother did this year, but basically what Christian Brown did in their championship team. And you hope, I don't know, there's the Olympics this summer. I mean, this team could be playing a lot of basketball once again, and I don't think that they're tired. Like, I know it's tough to repeat, and you played so much last year, and you're deep into the season this year, and it's a lot of wear and tear. They were relatively healthy for most of the playoffs, with like obviously the few like Jamal Murray things, but yeah, this team you'd expect to be back next year. I think this team runs it back. I think they keep the 28th overall pick. I think you look to add somebody that's NBA ready, and you just hope one of those young guys take a step back. But I think compared to like the Knicks or OKC, it's a little bit more of a tame offseason, and I don't think they look to do too much as well. Maybe they look to add a veteran. Maybe it's another wing off the bench, or maybe it's a big man. I mean, like maybe you take a flyer on like a JaVale McGee or Mason Plumlee, or I don't know if you can get a Mo Wagner, but you maybe look to do that this offseason as well, just to add some competition with Zeke Naji as the backup 5. So yeah, I think the Nuggets, if you had to rank like Nuggets, Thunder, Knicks, probably it's in that order of who I think can win a championship next year. So yeah, the Nuggets are going to be just fine in the Western Conference. So yeah, let's do our conference finals predictions. We have the Indiana Pacers going up against the Boston Celtics. This Boston Celtics team is going to be without Kristaps Porzingis for a little bit of this series. So I mean, I don't think that's obviously a reason to take Indiana, but that is going to be, I think, a vulnerable spot for this team. And that's why I was excited about the Knicks going up against the Celtics with at least some health, and the Knicks being such a good offensive rebounding team with the Celtics' lack of size. But I don't think that's going to matter too much, but I do think that this is going to be the most competitive Celtics series so far. Even though we did get some good games against the Cavs with their injuries alone, and I feel like Boston at times can play down to their opponents. There's been the weird game 2 things for them, losing game 2 against the Heat. Obviously, they had an historic shooting night there, and then losing game 2 against the Cavs. But with the Pacers being the healthiest team they're going up against, they're going to make their lives a living hell. And I think Indiana could steal game 1 in Boston. For sure. I do think that this is the most competitive Celtics series, like I said, and I think this goes to 6 games. I don't think Indiana has the top-end elite play to end up beating Boston, and I know Aaron Nesmith has stepped up defensively, but it's going to be tough to defend the Celtics. We'll see how Siakam looks, if he's guarding Tatum at times, or if it's Brown, and you assume Nesmith is on one of their top guys as well. But I do think it's going to be a little bit of a mismatch for this team. But I do think the Kristaps Porzingis piece of it, as long as Al Horford can play fine, like it should be okay for Boston. But I do plan on this, or I do envision this being the most competitive Celtics series, and I think the Pacers are going to push them to 6 games. It's a 17 win differential. If Boston loses this, it's going to be one of their worst playoff defeats in a while, and they've had some bad ones over the last couple of years, including last year to Miami. But yeah, I think it was I think it was like Real GM that put out this, like the graphic every year. It's like the Final Four and what they look like the years prior. And Boston has basically made it to every conference finals since 2017 outside of the 2021 year where they were banged up as well. So yeah, this is a team that it's finals or bust. I think Boston will finally beat them. This is one of the best teams they have had in quite some time overall. It's the best team they have had. It's better than the 2022 championship team because now you add in a better Derek White into the mix, Kristaps Porzingis, hopefully healthy at one point, and Drew Holiday. So yeah, I do think Boston will win in 6, but a great year for Indiana nonetheless. As for the Western Conference, this is a little bit more interesting of a series. You have the 3-seeded Timberwolves getting home court here, going up against Dallas, who was the 4-seed in the West. Oh man, I am looking forward to this series so much. I'm going to take Minnesota in 7. I think it's going to be another intense series. This is going to be, I think, one of the most entertaining series of the playoffs. I think no matter who we got in the conference finals in the West, it was going to be elite. If it was Denver, OKC, Denver, Dallas, Minnesota, OKC, or even Minnesota, Dallas, what we got. And I think it's going to be very fun to watch. Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jaden McDaniels try to make Luka's life a living hell and Kyrie Irving's life a living hell. Dallas has some size now with PJ Washington, Gafford, and Lively to put at Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, but you still favored Minnesota size in that regard. We'll see how Anthony Edwards looks in the biggest games of his career. First time ever in the conference finals, but we'll see if Luka, who I think we've all considered him like a top 3-ish player in this league. I think before the playoffs started, in my opinion, it was Jokic 1, Giannis 2, and kind of up in the air for 3. Was it still Steph? Was it a KD? Was it Embiid fully healthy? Could it be a Tatum? Was it Luka? Would it be a Shea? And I think Luka, second conference finals in 3 years. He's putting up elite numbers while semi-injured. I think that could also hurt him as well. Just obviously him playing banged up. So I do think Minnesota wins this in 7 games. And man, we're going to get Anthony Edwards maybe in the NBA Finals, which would be kind of wild. And that team defensively going up against Boston would be so much fun to watch. So yeah, I'm going to go with Minnesota in 7. And I think this is going to be one of the best series of the playoffs. And probably it's a shame because a healthy Knicks team, I think, would have actually made the Eastern Conference Finals potentially even more exciting, but I don't know how Indiana is going to match up against Boston, and I do think Boston wins in 6, and I could see a lot of those games being blowouts on one end of the floor, but I think Minnesota-Dallas is going to be one of the best series, so I'm looking forward to that a lot, and we're going to get Luka or Ant in the finals, which is crazy for what we're going to look at them as players overall, and yeah, I'm very excited for it nonetheless. I hope you guys did enjoy this episode of the Just Ballin' podcast. Let me know what you guys think on YouTube in the comments below if you're watching there, what you guys think of the offseason for these teams that got eliminated. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we appreciate a rating and review over there. It goes a long way. It takes a couple seconds. So thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.